Hi guys, this is Mr. Tan, and today we are looking at business research, and we are looking at the discussion paper. So, you've gone through the different stages, looked at your hypothesis, your literature review, your methodology, data collection, analysis of the data collection, the sampling, questionnaires, and now we're going on to, after having analyzed the data, what are your interpretations and what did you conclude from everything? So the discussion paper. So we're going to look at the structure of the discussion chapter, the interpret and data information, and writing the discussion chapter. The learning outcomes for this is to assess and apply techniques and processes used to investigate an important strategic or organizational issue or problem, plan and propose a research project, and critically analyze a business problem using both practitioner and academic material. So the session outcome, by the end of the session, you should be able to interpret the data and information that you've actually collected, draw conclusions based on the results, and support findings with the literature. So we're in the discussion section. So the structure of the discussion will be as follows: introduction, principal findings, interpretation of the findings, interpretation of context of literature, summary, conclusion. So we can see here, you've got the introduction, principal findings, interpretation of the findings, interpretation of in context to the literature, relating this back to your literature review. Because no point if you're not relating this back to your literature review and linking everything together. And then you have your summary and conclusion. So the discussion chapter should include the introduction, state the major findings, repeat the aims and objectives of the study, explain the meaning of your findings, relate the findings to similar studies, consider alternative explanation to the findings, acknowledge the limitations of the findings, and you may want to suggest. So discussion chapter. The purpose of the discussion chapter is to state your interpretations and opinions, explain the implications of your findings, and to make suggestions for future research. Its main function is to answer the questions posed in the introduction, explain how the results support the answers, and how the answers fit in with the existing knowledge on a topic. The functions of the discussion chapter: gives meaning to the results, the why, places results in context of theory or conceptual framework, places results in context of previous research, assesses importance of findings, acknowledges limitations of methods, and identifies new areas for exploration and or next steps. So let's have a look at the results versus discussion. Results are the facts of the findings, unedited and unqualified. And results are the presentation of the hard data, the statistics, tables, figures. And discussion is about, what the results actually mean. Discussion is about the implications of the findings. So we can see what we mean by the results and the discussion. The results, the actual findings, unedited, hard data, statistics, tables, figures. And then the discussion, is what these actually mean and the implications. So steps to writing the discussion chapter. Introduction to the discussion chapter. Restate the hypothesis, propositions, you were testing and answering the questions posed in your introduction. Address all the results relating to the questions, regardless of whether or not the findings were statistically significant. So, you look at all the stats in all your tables and, answer all the questions, regardless if you found something statistically significant or not. So, steps, to writing the discussion chapter. Support the answers with the results. Explain how your results relate to expectations and to the literature, your literature review. How does this relate to your literature? You've got to link it back. Clearly state why the findings are acceptable and how they are consistent to fit with the previous published knowledge on the topic. And address all the results relating to the questions, regardless of whether or not your findings were statistically significant. You need to also describe the patterns, principles and relationships shown by each major finding, result, and put them in perspective. Defend your answers if necessary by explaining both why your answer is satisfactory and why others are not. Give both sides to the argument and make your explanation convincing. Further steps. Discuss and evaluate conflicting explanations of the results. This is, a sign of good discussion. Explain how the results and conclusions of this study are important and how they influence on our knowledge, or understanding of the problem being examined. And, conclusion of the discussion. So, a sample discussion chapter introduction. So we can see here, introduction. This chapter presents the main findings of the research in terms of its contributions to literature. The key issues of the study, research questions raised in the CSR literature, the methodology or agent-based modeling applied to these issues and to the stakeholder participatory approach. The former is very important aspects of the contribution of knowledge because they are an original combination in the methodological approach, and so they shall be the focus of attention in this chapter. Section 1 returns to the discussion of, corporate social responsibility, CSR, partners who are discussed in chapter 6, and extends this to consider further details and lack of feedback and access to the organization. Section 2 considers the extent into which the objectives of the participatory aspect of the case study were attained and reflects upon the experience of collaborating with industry by considering the usability, of the approach. It also develops some personal views on how the research progressed and what was learned by the experience. Section 3 compares 3 alternative approaches to participatory inquiry and draws some additional lessons from this literature. And then Section 4 reflects on the main findings from the research by revisiting the original research hypothesis and considering how the case study has developed understanding in these areas. The findings are placed, in the context of the earlier literature about the impact of e-commerce and are used to make some observations on the key themes or, intermediation value chain of relations and the integration of e-commerce systems. In particular, this session looks at the issues of how to obtain. So thank you today from Mr. Tan on the discussion chapter and paper. So I hope this helps in you providing and completing your research project with this chapter. Thank you today.